Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining. Happy Friday, and you've done it. You've made it to the end of the week. It's now the weekend, so I hope you're ready to relax. I hope you've got something nice planned, and you've got something to look forward to. So, of course, we'll be doing this one live today. So if you're listening in right now, welcome and thank you for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. And of course, if you're listening in later, thank you for listening in later, whether that's on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify or cloudwithchris.com. Wherever you're listening, thank you for the support. It's greatly appreciated. So, you know what to do. If you like this content, if you like this episode, please go ahead, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know as soon as there is brand new content available for you. So with that, the ground rules are out of the way. If you are listening live, we have got the live chat, of course. If there's any questions you want to ask along the way, please go ahead and do so. More than happy to have a bit of audience interaction along the way. So, without further ado, let's go ahead, jump over to the screen share and talk about the topic for the day. And the topic for the day is once again going back to GitHub. So it's been a while since we've had a dedicated session around GitHub and GitHub Actions and how it relates to Azure. So thought we'd revisit this for once. You know, it's been, like I say, a little while. And we're really going to be carrying on the journey that we were on previously. We previously set up a .NET application. We were using GitHub Actions to go and build that, eventually to go and deploy that. So we're going to be moving away from the .NET application today and actually focusing on cloudwithchris.com, just because I think it's a great example of how I go ahead and use environments to deploy using GitHub Actions and using environments to deploy to Azure. So thought that was a great example rather than making a contrived example. So let's just do a bit of a recap, I guess, for anyone who's new listening in here, and maybe if you are familiar, but just need a bit of a refresher. So GitHub Actions is effectively a way of automating things by using GitHub. So whether that is, for example, a CI or a CD pipeline, so continuous integration, continuous delivery, as soon as code is checked in, being able to build it, compile it, test it, and ultimately go and deliver it to some kind of end environment like a test, a QA, a prod, or whatever ring deployment if you're using that way, for example. But also, you can go ahead and automate just things inside of GitHub as well. So that could be if a new pull request is created, which, sure, it's still part of that CI/CD process. But what about if you're using things like GitHub issues or, GitHub projects, for example? What if you want to go ahead and automate a comment being created or automatically add some issues to a project board, for example? All of that is possible using GitHub Actions. So it really is this end-to-end automation, as we mentioned there, for GitHub. So we've covered those in previous episodes, and in case you are interested, let's just navigate over once again to my YouTube page here. And you will see as we scroll down, we have a whole section of videos about GitHub Actions. So as I mentioned there, starting off with the source controlling, going to GitHub Actions, deploying the ARM templates, deploying the .NET code, and then going on to some things like the GitHub Universe conference that happened recently, GitHub issues, and then Visual Studio Code, GitHub Code Spaces as well, which will feature in this session today. So with that context then, let's go ahead and jump in here. So as a bit of a refresher, if we navigate into our .github folder in my GitHub repository, you can see that I've got my GitHub repository here, chrisreddington.com/cloudwithchris.com. I am just using github.com here. There's nothing special apart from me being in my web browser. So any of you can follow along here if you are interested as well. And if I go ahead and navigate a little further down my folder hierarchy here into the workflows folder, you can see I've got a number of these different YAML files. And these are my GitHub Actions. This is the magic of my automation. So you may have heard of things like pipelines as code. Lots of people will have heard of infrastructure as code. It's taking that same analogy and codifying the workflows or the pipelines and deployments that we'd be used to. Maybe we've built them in a UI previously, not for GitHub Actions, but maybe other platforms, for example. Now there's a theme and a trend emerging of codifying, I'll use that word again, I guess, those pipelines there. So that's what you see in this folder here. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this master YAML file. So the way that I've structured my pipelines or my workflows here is I have them in different files. Now, yes, you could go and use conditions, for example, for different stages and have one workflow or one pipeline to see the end-to-end. That's nice if you want to have that end-to-end experience and understand what stages have been executed where, but for me, having these different files and these different workflows is absolutely fine. It works for me, so I've got no problems there. So let's jump in and just zoom in a little bit here, just so you can all see that. You'll see, once again, we'll quickly run through the schema and the syntax here. We've got a few key properties here, so the name of the workflow that we're referring to, the on trigger, referring to what event we are reacting to there. So we're reacting to any push which is going into that master branch, but we are ignoring a certain subfolder there, and I'll show you why a little bit later. That might be interesting for the purposes of what we're talking here. But we're ignoring any changes that happen in my podcast audio folder. Then what I have is a series of jobs. So I have a build job, and that has a series of steps. Those steps run on an Ubuntu image, which is hosted by GitHub. That GitHub agent, as I say, is hosted by GitHub rather than self-hosted by me. And then we have a series of steps. So once again, for anyone who's new or maybe hasn't delved into GitHub Actions as much as yet, you have these things called steps, and these steps ultimately, if I just change screen here, are other GitHub repositories. So you'll see that there is this Azure/login repository. If I scroll down a little bit to my second stage here, I've got a publish stage, and you will see that I have an action called Azure/login, and that @v1 tag just refers to a particular release. And we'll then navigate back there, and I'll open that in my private browser. There we go. And we can see here we have the v1 tag there on that particular commit. So all we're saying is we want to go and pull in the GitHub action from another repository, which happens to be tagged with this friendly tag here and actually points back to this particular commit. That's what we're saying in the GitHub action workflow there. So that is ultimately what we are doing inside of GitHub Actions, is just pointing to a series of tasks in other repositories there. Now, of course, we've got all the configurations. So what I'm doing in this particular workflow file, for example, is I'm going ahead and I've got my checkout task. So I'm checking out a repository. So it's this repository. We're installing some node dependencies, which my website has. I'm setting up Hugo on the workflow runner that is available from GitHub. Effectively, it's an agent if you come from a world where they refer to them as agents. And then what I do is some tokenization and ultimately go and build and then package up that site to be deployed as an artifact. Don't deploy it in this stage just yet, but that is kind of my build step and my publish step there for publishing the artifact ready for the next stage. Now, the publishing to Azure is a separate stage. And you can see in this stage, I have a property called environment. And that environment has a subproperty called name and a subproperty of URL. And the one is just, it's a key value. So we're referring to production.azure. And then the URL is pointing to my public URL. So www.cloudwithchris.com with the HTTPS prefix in front. Now, that's all well and good, but hold on, Chris. Where does that magic production.azure thing come from? Well, let's just go and take a look at some other workflows here. Let's go and take a look at my preview workflow file here. And we'll scroll down because I have some other stages here. We have another publish stage, but this time it's preview.azure. So interesting. Yet again, we've got this kind of key value thing going on. Let's look once more at this staging workflow. And you can see here, I will have another publish stage, but this time publish-azure, and this time I have staging.azure. If I scroll down, you can see I have a publish step for GCP and a staging.gcp, then publish for AWS and a staging.aws. So okay, we're clearly referencing some kind of value there to map to an environment. But what's going on? Where is that environment? What are we actually mapping to? So if I just scroll back to the top of my repository here, when I zoom out ever so slightly, you can see that I've got this settings icon at my repository level. If I go ahead and click on that, on the left-hand side, you will see that I have a couple of options, one for environments and one for secrets. So if I click on environments, you can see that this is where we go ahead and have those mappings that we saw in the YAML. So we don't have to go ahead and predefine these. If it doesn't exist when the workflow goes and runs, it will be automatically created here. So we don't need to worry about that side of things. But just to complete the picture here, you also have secrets. And secrets can be defined at a repository level or on a per environment basis. So you can see here I've got a number of secrets that are scoped at a repository level. So for example, my AWS ones and my GCP ones, I haven't yet scoped to an environment. So they are available across the repository level. Now, why is this important? Principle of least privilege. That is the reason that this is important. So think about it from the perspective of all of these different credentials that you're seeing here are a bit like service principals or user logins. That service principal will go ahead and have access to some level of permission in your environment. Now, one of the things that we hear a lot about in the DevOps space from different angles is this way of reducing the blast radius. So when we put this into a perspective of permission management and principle of least privilege, how do we go ahead, minimize the blast radius so that we're not giving a service principal super duper permissions across our entire subscription? You know, my staging service principal, for example, only needs to go and access my staging storage account and my staging endpoints. It doesn't need access to my production endpoints, for example. So why would I go ahead and grant it that level of access? Why would I go and use one service principal across all those environments when I probably want to go and restrict that based upon an environment by environment basis? So that is why you'll want to go ahead and use these environment secrets. So you can access those in the secrets panel that we're looking at here in the settings, or of course you can access them from the environments. But of course, if you click on it in the settings here, you will be taken to the environment anyway, as we will see. There we go. So environments are not just about secrets though. You've also got the ability to go and execute these manual approvals. Now this all became available just before Christmas on GitHub. So if you've used Azure Pipelines or similar, you'll be familiar with this kind of concept with the environments concept in Azure Pipelines there as well. And of course, there's things like automated approvals, etc. Those aren't quite here at this moment. Hopefully they're on their way. But at the moment, what you have is required reviewers, so a manual approval, and then a wait timer then as well. So amount of time you've got to wait before allowing that deployment to go ahead and proceed. And then what you also have is these environment secrets. Now, the benefit of using these secrets in a environment basis compared to the repository basis is they will only be pulled in to the GitHub action workflow and the runner when they are needed. So what does that mean? If I have, for example, production.azure and we are deploying, I don't know, our preview environment or our staging environment, that is not going to get pulled in unless it's explicitly referenced by the workflow and that stage explicitly needs that particular secret. Otherwise, or rather that environment, I should say. Otherwise, it won't get pulled in because remember we reference in the stages at the environment level there. So that's the benefit of scoping my credentials rather than having a production_Azure credential at the repository secret level. That's why I would want to go ahead and scope it in an environment, because then once again, we're controlling when and how that environment secret is allowed to be used there. So that all looks well and good. So let's just go ahead and do a bit more exploring here, because how do we actually go to that stage? What do we need to go and do, for example? So let's just navigate to the Azure/login step and take a look at what's happening here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and use an environment here. We're going to create a new one, and we're just going to call this demo.azure. We'll go and configure that. We'll have a required reviewer, and that required reviewer is me, maybe. There we go. And we're going to save that protection rule. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a secret, and I'm going to call that Azure credentials, which is kind of the convention that people use here. And I'm just going to go ahead and navigate across to this Azure/login step. And what you'll see in this action here is there's a series of documentation, a series of steps that you can go ahead and complete. So for example, you can see here that this is the step that I would go and use to go and grant contributor on a specific web app, for example. You can see here this is the CLI that I would use to go and create a contributor at a resource group level. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead on another window a moment. I'm going to open up a new browser. We're going to create my resource group just in the Azure portal here, because we'll do everything completely away from my production environment so that when you see what I'm going to do here, none of you have access, just in case. So Cloud with Chris Demo Actions RG. There we go. So we're going to go and create that one. And that looks good. There we go. Good. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm just going to go back to this example. Just going to pull up Visual Studio Code for a moment. We'll open that up and we'll just go and edit this. So we'll call this something like GitHub Action Connection Demo, something like that. We'll give it a role of reader, because we'll just do like a group list or something here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find my subscription ID and there we go, and the resource group as well. So what we want is we want that section there, and there we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up my Windows terminal. I am a big fan of Windows Terminal. If you haven't used it already, I thoroughly suggest that you go and download it if you're running Windows. Because what you can do is you can run a Linux environment, you can run your PowerShell, for example. And when I say you can run a Linux environment, that's not strictly true. What I mean there is I can attach to Windows subsystem for Linux that I've already got running. I can actually execute commands from this one terminal application and run many consoles here. That's what I mean. So just in case anyone's going to pick me up on that comment. So let me go ahead and run that here. And what you'll see is, there we go, demo gods are looking favorably on me right now. Not. But what you can see is, obviously I've got a failure there, but what would happen in that scenario is I would get some JSON outputted there. So I would get some JSON, which effectively allows me to go and copy and paste that over into the GitHub Actions. So what I'm going to do a moment is I'm going to log out. I'm going to log back in with another account here, because I know what I've done. I've logged in with an account which doesn't have the required level of access on my Azure AD. So bear with me whilst I do that. This is where I should have had some hold music or something similar. And I'm just going to go open up one more browser because of my last pass. And there we go. Good. So notification should come through for my multi-factor. There it is. And lo and behold, we will now log in. Excellent. So what I should now be able to do is I should be able to bring up the Windows terminal once I've cleared my screen, because all of my subscription details will appear. There we go. Good. And let's try that again. Here we go. We'll go and run that. And now what we should see is the JSON will appear on screen momentarily, which will give me reader access to that particular resource group that we looked at a moment ago. So we can see that it's retrying the creation of that role there. So we'll let that happen in the background. And what I'll do in the meantime is I'll go ahead and I will bring up my portal once again. We're just going to create a storage account. So we'll go and create a storage account here. There it is. Then we'll call this Cloud with Chris Demo Storage. Put it in North Europe once again. There we go. Put it locally redundant, and that is good enough for me. So that terminal output that you can see here, here it is. You can see it's my client ID, my client secret, my subscription ID, my tenant ID, and don't you worry, I will be removing that as soon as I'm done with this demo. There is a reason I gave it only read access, of course, to that one resource group. But what I can do now is I can go ahead back to my environment, and I can grant, or I can rather paste that output into that Azure underscore credentials. And that is now all that I need to do to go ahead and effectively grant the permission for that particular credential there. So what I can now go and do is I can go and let me just take note of this environment. It's demo.azure. I can go ahead and I can open up a GitHub code space, because we love GitHub code spaces. Now, what it will do is it will just go ahead and run the existing container that was built previously for me here, rather than building it again from scratch. So you can see it's starting the code space. And I'll have my development environment in the cloud here, ready to go, ready to get started nice and quickly. Taking a bit of time, so given just time pressures of being live, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this locally instead for now, because I have the window already open. So let's jump ahead and go to my GitHub workflows file. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy my preview YAML. I'm going to go ahead, copy and paste that, and I'm going to call this demo.yaml instead. We're going to switch the branch over to preview demo workflow, for example. And I'm going to change everything here. And instead, we're just going to go to the publish step. I'm going to change my environment to be demo.azure. We're going to change this probably to be on push to a preview instead as well. I think I need preview/star. This is where we get to see how the sausage is made with the GitHub action workflows. And what you can see here is all I'm going to do is slightly tweak this GitHub action workflow. Oops, if I go and remove that all properly, you can see we're just going to log into Azure. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and list out the resources that are in a resource group here. So I just need to go and refresh my memory on the exact syntax. I believe it is something along the lines of AC resource list. And then I think I can specify a resource group property like that. So, yes, there we go. So the resource group that we created there was Chris Admin Resource Group. That was definitely not the one that I created. It was this one. There we go. I'm glad I have my wits about me here. Let's go and do that again. So create a storage account. That's why. I created it in the complete wrong resource group. That is my bad for not concentrating. There we go. Right, that is better. Okay, so North Europe. Oops, North Europe. There we go. And we'll go and create that once again here. Good. So if we just navigate back to the resource group, what we will see under access control is one of those service principals will be a reader. There it is. There's the reader for us. And what we can now go and do is we can go and list that resource group. So we should see a storage account, of course. So that looks, I think, okay, but the way to test it out, there's a couple of ways. There is an open source project where you can go ahead and run some of these GitHub action workflows locally. There is no native way of almost having a sandbox on my own machine to go and trial this GitHub action workflow. So let's just go ahead and commit that. So example workflow demo, we'll go and call that, commit that. And if you've read any of my blog posts, you know that I sign my commits, so I need my GPG key. So we'll go and put that into the machine. Got to go and enter my passcode for that. That is now signing my commit, and we can go and push that to GitHub. So if we now jump back to my GitHub repository, which was this window. Nope. Yeah, the code space did open in the end. There we go. So let's go back to the repository. Take a look at the action there, and we can see obviously there was a failure. This workflow is not valid. The workflow must contain at least one job. Yeah, of course. It's because I left the needs build in there because I got rid of my dependencies, of course. So let's try that again. Remove dependency. There we go. And we'll go and commit that again. Push that up. And now when we go to our action, hopefully all being well, that should run. And you can see that I've now been asked to approve that to go ahead. So we can go ahead, click review deployments, and I can say, yep, looks good to me. Obviously, I would review those changes in real world scenarios. But there we go. That all looks good to me. So that is now going to go ahead and start running. So what it will do is it will set up that job for us. And you can see what it's doing is it's downloading the repository Azure/CLI. And it will also download the Azure/login repository for us as well. So remember, all of those actions that we're running are just other repositories. It's logging in to Azure using that credential that we just passed a moment ago in the secrets. And what you can see now is it's going ahead. It's not uploading static content to storage. I haven't renamed that friendly name in the output here. But what it will do is it will output the list of resources that are available in that resource group, assuming that I got my syntax correct there. But what it's going to do is it's going to run in the context of that service principal that I created earlier. So it's not in the context of me as Chris. You can see there, it lists out that storage account that we created just a moment ago there. And that is it. That is how you go ahead and use these GitHub action environments to go and deploy to Azure. So you can go ahead, you can scope those down on an environment by environment basis. So you have this nice control, this principle of least privilege. And then you go and create this service principal using that kind of approach that was documented on the Azure/login repository here. And that is as simple as it is. And as we've discussed, you can go ahead, you can make sure that that secret is only pulled in when you reference that environment then, rather than using it as a repository secret. So definitely something I recommend as a practice there to move forward in managing your secrets. Now, one nice thing, just in case you're interested, you're not limited to using that environment in one workflow only. If I go ahead, take a look at my .github/workflows, remember I have my master YAML file that references the master environment here. The production environment, I should say. The environment concept is really just a logical kind of concept. You can map it how you like. So for example, if I take a look at my podcast audio YAML file, I have a workflow which goes ahead and actually, once it detects there's a change in the podcast audio folder, because yes, I do Git source control my podcast audio files, not quite an anti-pattern as you might be thinking if you're listening in. I am using Git LFS to version those. But what I do is I go ahead, use the Azure login task once again, in the context of my production.azure environment, so that same service principle, and I go ahead and upload those MP3 files then to my storage account. And for you eagle-eyed viewers and readers here, you'll see that I'm using the auth mode login. So I'm actually using the data plane role-based access control functionality of Azure Storage. So I'm not using like a shared access signature or anything. I'm actually using Azure role-based access on the data plane with that same service principle to upload the files to my storage account. So again, lots of goodness coming together there with principle of least privilege to make sure that only this particular workflow is uploading to that storage account there. So there we go. In a nutshell, that is really what I wanted to go and show today. And hey, Raquel, thank you for tuning in, and I hope that work is going well, and great, appreciate you going ahead and checking this out later. So with that, folks, let's just jump back and start wrapping up here. So there we go. We went ahead and looked at GitHub Actions, had a very quick refresher at how the syntax works and what GitHub Actions are, why you might want to go ahead and use them. Then what we did is we really went deep into looking at how I go ahead and use GitHub Actions on Cloud with Chris, but more importantly, the environment concept in GitHub Actions as well. So if you want to go ahead and use these, it's really easy to get started. Just go ahead, take a look at the environments documentation on GitHub Actions, and of course, all of the tasks on GitHub Actions as well, like the github.com/azure/login. There is one for Azure/actions as well, which is a bit of a catch-all, if you like, of all of the different Azure GitHub Actions. So go ahead and check that one out as well. And there are a load of GitHub Actions samples for Azure as well. So I think it's Actions Workflow Samples Azure. I'll go and dig that out here in a moment. But if you are interested, I will go ahead and link those in the description. Please go ahead, like this episode if you enjoyed the content, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like about 90 or 85% of you now who are not subscribed. I am on the hunt for my 500 subscribers, and I'm really happy to see that I'm now on 471, in fact, as I'm just checking here. So what's that? 29 to go. So please go ahead and please support. And of course, not just on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com, where you can go ahead and listen to the episodes as you go ahead and read the transcripts in real time as well. So a live session today, maybe not as polished and as seamless as some of the others, but again, don't want to always go for that type of content. Want to make sure that we can see how things work for real and no smoke or mirrors going on here. So thank you for listening in. Any questions, hit me up on Twitter at RedOBowen. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next episode next week, thanks for watching and bye for now.